welcome to my podcast on real relationships. My name is Sophie Passon and I am a relationship expert, international speaker and best-selling author of the book Your Other Half. I decided to start this podcast because, in my opinion, relationships are not currently being portrayed as they really are. Whether you're watching the news, TV or on social media, the perception given to people is wrong. And my aim is to talk about what happens in the real world, talk about real stories and listen to what real people think, do or go through, as opposed to creating expectations of something that does not actually exist. I may not agree with everything that is said by my guests, but it is their chance to express their opinions and their stories. And here today we have Matt Brown from Develop Your People. We're going to talk about self-development, personal development, training in general, and how it can help us all on an individual level, but also within the structure of a company, because having happy staff normally is key to having a healthy, profitable company. Hi, Matt.
Hi, Sophie.
How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Yourself?
Yeah, not bad, thank you. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself first?
Yeah, sure. My background for the last 20 years has been working in learning and development. And earlier on this year, I was made redundant from my previous role, and I decided that after years of saying I'd love to have a go at doing it for myself, I finally bit the bullet and thought, well, let's have a go at it and see what happens. So I've set up Develop Your People as a learning and development consultancy and training provider, hopefully with being able to help people, having spent 20 years in the corporate world, working in the UK, mainland Europe, Middle East, Africa, USA, Canada. So, a fair bit of international experience. And I would hope over that time I've picked up one or two hints and tips that can help people.
Okay. So the first thing I want to say is that in terms of personal development, in the universe, everything either expands or contracts. And that's true for metal with the heat. That's true for a flower. It will either grow or it will die. But we forget sometimes, I don't forget, but some people forget that actually it's true for us too. And these people are often the ones that believe, I'm not going to go as far as generalizing that they know it all, but that they don't necessarily need to learn certain things or don't need to learn any more. Yeah. Well, have you come across this at all?
I may have met the occasional person who has views like that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're wrong. Simple as that. Yeah. I look at it very, very simply that we start learning when we hit daylight or artificial light, depending where we are when we are born. We can have discussions as to whether or not the fetus learns while it's in the womb and stuff like that. But let's just stick with the easy one. You start learning when you're born and you finish learning when you die, or maybe 10 seconds after that, because then you find out if that next bit is actually true or not. But I think, there are people out there, I've come across them, who think, they know it all, they don't need to keep learning. And then if you don't want to carry on learning, why are you bothering to carry on living? Because there's no point. And interesting, you talk about expansion and contraction. The other side of it, of course, is if we don't use what we know, we lose it.
Mm-hmm. That's very true.
And I can't remember who it was, but there was there's a famous quote about knowing something and not using it is the same as not knowing it.
Funny enough, I put a quote up recently, which was, I can't exactly remember the wording of it, but it was something about a fool can know, but you need to understand, which is similar to that. Yeah. And obviously you mentioned that, we learn from the moment we pop out, so to speak. But that's an unconscious learning. Where do you think our relationship with learning and development actually begins? And how does it carry on through life?
I suppose if you want to look at it in a formal way, we'd say, well, it begins when we go off to school. Mm-hmm. But then at the same time, I think if we're going to learn properly, we need to be involved, we need to be engaged, we need to be interested. And I can only speak for myself, and I'm not quite convinced that in my school years I was particularly interested in what they were trying to tell me. I've actually developed a theory over the years that's basically we should leave school at about the age of 12 and then go back when we're about mid-20s, because then we may actually appreciate what we're trying to be taught. So to be honest, I don't think you can say that the human being as a whole will start learning at this age. It's very much down to the individual. It's about, do they want to learn things? Do they have an interest in the world as a whole? Because I think that's part and parcel of it. To want to know what's going on in the world, to want to understand not just what's going on, but why these things are happening. That's all about learning. And if you have this natural curiosity, then you're more likely to engage in formal learning and development. And if you're in the workplace and you're just told by your boss, you need to go on this course, and you say why, and they just look at you blankly, then you're not coming along engaged.
And why do you believe it is important to invest in your staff and in yourself?
Well, one, I've already said it. If the day you don't need to learn anymore, you don't need to bother living anymore. But there's a study that's been done by Gallup. They've been studying workplace for somewhere in the region of 20 plus years, and have interviewed millions and millions of different people. I believe the total is somewhere in the region of 20 million people have been involved in this survey. And they've come up with 12 things that need to be present in the workplace to get employee engagement. And if you'll just bear with me 2 seconds, I will just
tell us what they are.
I won't tell you all of them, but I will tell you. You have things like, I know what's expected of me at work. My supervisor or someone at work seems to care about me as a person. My opinions count. But number 6 is there is someone at work who encourages my development.
So, and I think this is it. Sometimes managers can forget that people actually want to grow. And in the same breath, some people don't want to move up the food chain, so to speak.
Yeah. But I think even people who don't want to move up the food chain still, they still benefit from receiving development. Because otherwise, again, we're saying that there are people who don't need to know anymore. And to enable someone to become better at their job, more confident in their job or whatever, is just as important as getting people who are ready to move up the food chain. Because ultimately, if you look at any business, the business is a pyramid, so not everyone can move up it.
Exactly.
So, there's a danger of saying in that we only develop people for advancement. But if you're not interested or you're not suitable to be advanced, then you're not worth investing in.
Yeah. And in your experience and career, did you find that the people are more likely to be engaged? Because the reason why I'm also asking this question, I'm thinking of myself here, for the benefit of people who don't know this piece of information. Matt did train me on a number of subjects when I was back in the corporate world some thousands of years ago.
We're going back a while, aren't we?
Yeah, definitely. And I know that I was probably coming across as one that was quite self-motivated and quite, eager to learn, so to speak. So do you think that you need to be at a certain point in your life from what you've seen, or is it a certain type of person, or is it that you're inspired? Because I know that for certain courses, I certainly like health and safety. I know that wasn't you did it, but I really was not inspired by that one bit. I knew I had to have it. Where others, I was probably like really more motivated to do it and would have asked to go on such things.
Yeah, interestingly, I didn't train health and safety for exactly the same reason that you didn't enjoy going on health and safety. And I always believe that if I wasn't interested or enjoying what I do, then I'm never going to be able to engage the people who are there.
Hmm.
I think that people need to understand the benefit to themselves, or want there to be a benefit to themselves, in any form of development that they have. So you can't say that someone who's got this many years experience or whatever. I've come across people who are, fresh out of college or whatever, and have been an absolute pleasure to train, because they're so interested and they want to learn. I've come across people who've been in the workplace 25 years, and I just can't wait for the day to finish, and I hope I never see them again. So it's so much of it, I think, is to do with the mindset of the individual. But also, I think there was something I read recently, and I've got it written down because I came across it earlier. I thought I must find that. And it was, the personal development is a belief that you are worth the effort, time, and energy to develop yourself. So basically, if we're not interested in trying to make ourselves a better or more rounded or more knowledgeable person, then it doesn't matter how good the development opportunities are. If we don't want to do it, we won't do it.
Yeah, and picking up on a point of something you just said, do you think that around mindset, do you think that managers can and should influence the mindset of the employees? I know it's like, is a can of worms. I'm overgeneralizing. Yeah. I'm aware. But,
I know you. Yes. The answer is yes, they can, and yes, they should. Generally speaking, I think it's easier for a manager to, if we change mindset with motivation, if we say it's a lot easier for a manager to demotivate somebody than it is to motivate them. But at the same time, they have a role to play in ensuring they create an environment in which you or I or whoever it is able to become self-motivated. But the attitude of the manager is absolutely fundamental towards how we see work.
And what have you learnt about people and personal development about you, throughout your career? There must have been some gems, and it must be quite, I mean, I like people watching, but when you do these things, it must be fascinating.
It is absolutely fascinating watching people, because I think, when I started out doing it, you'd think, oh, well, the person who's quiet isn't interested. No, but some people are just naturally quiet. So I suppose if I've learned anything, it's don't judge a book by its cover, which I think is an incredibly, that's a life lesson, if you like.
Yeah.
But, people are different. And if you are prepared to invest in them, I've had some I would consider major triumphs where I've had people come along on courses who I've been told are really difficult, really negative, and they're not in the they have been to begin with, but when you actually are prepared to listen to them or whatever, and engage with them and respect the fact that they have different opinions, then sometimes you would actually find you can turn these around. I can think of one specific individual who I obviously would never mention by name, who, when I first met him, was told in advance, he is the delegate from hell. I now, if I see his name on an attendance sheet in advance of the course, am really pleased that he's coming along, because I know he'll come along. Yes, he will challenge, but he's interested. He's got a lot of useful things to say. And just because he doesn't agree with people doesn't mean he's negative.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, I remember that in the company that we worked for together, I was labelled as the troublemaker.
I have no idea why that was. So.
No, nor do I. I found that out years later, which actually did bother me a little bit, because I thought, why was I a troublemaker? Just because I was trying to make it better.
Yeah. But this is the thing, people don't like to be challenged. And I think also you get situations where, people are happy happy with things being wrong, if you like, because it gives them something to moan about.
Yeah, very true.
That doesn't mean we want it changed. And when people come in and start challenging and asking, well, why do we do this? Why don't we try it like this or whatever? It sort of just upsets their status quo. And yeah, you're right. We do, because I do see some of those traits in myself as well. We do get labelled as troublemakers, and actually people don't seem to realise we're not trying to make trouble. We're actually trying to make things better.
Exactly. So how does training improve productivity and performance?
Well, I mean, if you go back to the Gallup thing, one, the straight away, if you give people the opportunity to be trained, then they are more likely to be an engaged employee. If you look at some of the sort of the basic motivational models, you look at Hertzberg and things like that, then they talk about how having investment in people's development is a motivator as opposed to just a hygiene factor, that if it's not there, it demotivates. So I think it makes a tremendous difference to have a business that actually says to you, even subliminally, I value you enough as an employee that I'm going to invest in your development, because that's really what we're saying to people. And it's a very powerful message. But at the same time, yes, I have a role to play in driving my own development in the workplace. I should be able to go in when I was working in the corporate world, I should have been able to go to my boss and be able to have meaningful discussions as to why I would like specific development, how it would benefit me and how it would benefit the business. Not always having it agreed to, but we should be able to have discussions. And he or she would also have been able to say, I think you should have this development because one of the biggest frustrations I have found in my 20 odd years of doing this is you talk to people at courses and you'll say to them just that simple question, so why are you here today?
And they don't get it.
They just stare at you blankly because nobody has told them, You'll get them saying, oh, I was told yesterday afternoon I'm here. So you think, well, their mindset isn't right for the, the manager should be saying to them, you are going on this course because. And you're not talking war and peace, you're talking 10 seconds. Just actually give somebody an idea of why it's going to benefit them. But in terms of productivity, if we are happy at work, more often than not, no one's happy at work every second of every day, but if you're happy at work, you're working somewhere where you feel engaged, you're going to be more productive. And more importantly, you're less likely to take a bad day home with you.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think the other thing that I certainly noticed when I was employed, which was, as I said, years ago now, actually it's frightening how many years ago it was, is that sometimes the higher end, shall we say, of managers, so the more senior level, really ought to go on training courses. But somehow they don't. You reached a point and it doesn't seem to be offered anything anymore. And that, for me, that's certainly where I felt that was starting to stagnate and that I was getting bored and beat.
It is, I think it's a common thing, not just in the business we were both in, but most businesses I've been in, and they're exactly the same. Far too often, training is seen as a tick box exercise, that in order to be able to perform task X or job X, you need to be able to, or you must have gone on, training course Y. And the crucial thing really is, they see it as training, not as development. And that's the thing. So they'll look at, I nearly used a name there of somebody we both worked with, but, an example of, let's say your general manager that you used to have, they'd look at this individual and say, right, they have been in this business since time began.
give or take.
Nearly, yeah. So therefore, he does not need any training because he knows how to do it all. And yes, in terms of process, as long as process didn't change, he pretty much did know it. But he still needs development. Everybody needs development. And that individual I actually found was one of the more enlightened ones and did understand the benefits of development. It wasn't just about go on this training course.
And interestingly, talking of said individual, one of the things I found is that when he, before he promoted me, he said basically, we're putting you in this position on a temporary basis until we find someone capable of doing the job, which was not the most highly motivating thing I ever heard, to be honest.
Yeah.
And I just kept going, and I just thought, well, you know, I used to be experienced, and now I can put that on my CV and move on. And actually, he said individual did change his mind about me and offered me the permanent position, which was at a moment in time. But what is really interesting is, whilst I'm sure he would disagree with that, but over the following 2 to 3 years, I genuinely believe that my troublemaking ways and that my constant challenging of him and his ideas made him look at things differently and made him change. And I think that's something that sometimes we forget as well, is the relationships within the workplace can open up new horizons within people.
And that is actually, that's development, isn't it?
Exactly that.
Yeah, development is not just about going on training courses. I mean, again, there's quite a well-known model of they talk about the 70-20-10 model of development. That going on a training course is the impact it has on an individual is actually only about 10%. Because ultimately, if somebody comes on a training course, they are passive. You know, I am the person who is active. I'm the person who knows it theoretically and is imparting knowledge to them. Now, they're not, you know, I will try and get them to do activities, etc., but they are still ultimately passive. And if I think that someone has remembered 10% of what we talked about, I actually think I've had quite a decent day. I'll be happy with that, because you have to be realistic. You then get 20% impact, which comes from relationships, and it is literally just observing other people. There's this concept called the shadow of the leader, where any of us who've worked in management, when we first start off in management, what we actually do is we look at all the managers we've had, and we try and keep the good bits of each of them, and hopefully
learn from the bad bits.
Yeah, hopefully don't repeat the bad bits. So we all become this kind of amalgamation. But that's the 20%. And then lastly, you get experiential learning, which is the really, really powerful one, which is the just sort of spending time with colleagues, discussing things, working with people. I love sitting in on training courses that other people do, because you'll just sit there and you'll look at it and you'll think, I never thought of doing it that way, or whatever. And that's that 70% of the experience. And what you were saying there about said individual being challenged, and that's actually developing them at the same time.
Yeah, and I think the other things as well with that, in all of these, you know, categories, setups, whatever you want to call it, is that it gives both the employee, I mean, they're all employed really, but you know what I mean, yes. The employees and the managers a bigger sense of self-belief, self-worth, self-esteem, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. And it gives them more confidence because, you know, even when the subject matter may not seem relevant or is overly interesting, you know, we learn. And by doing so, you can then impart back down the food chain.
Yes. Well, I mean, that is, I think, an incredibly important point, that ultimately learning is only useful if we share it. If I learn something, but, you know, I now have the knowledge, so, yeah, it's mine, knowledge is power, then that's not knowledge, you know. You're absolutely right. It's about how can I take what I've learned and help my colleagues or friends or whatever it is. because learning and development and stuff. It's not just about the workplace. It doesn't end at sort of 5:30 or whatever. It carries on.
And talking of development, one of the things I'm finding at the moment, and I know that is probably being a bit hypocritical here, but listen to what I'm saying and go with it to the end. I'm just seeing bloody experts popping up all over the place. And it does wind me up a little bit, because how do you call yourself an expert when you've done something for 2 months? You know, yeah. I read somewhere, I heard somewhere that to be classed as an expert, it's got to be a minimum of 3 years to 5 years, or being able to demonstrate, you know, some sort of proficiency. So I know I call myself that, but I have the 3 to 5 years. Actually, I've got even more than that. I didn't start calling myself that at the beginning. Do you find that, and do you think that that's also one of the new reasons what sometimes people believe that they don't necessarily need more development and training because they already know it all? They're the expert.
So they say 10,000 hours practice is what you need. So yeah, you're talking your 5 years minimum, and you are absolutely right. I don't know what it is. I think some of it actually is probably to do with social media. Or yeah, I was trying to be polite actually, but yeah, but I think you are right. But you know, everyone has to be an influencer these days. If you want to be on LinkedIn, you can't just be somebody. You have to be, you know, an expert, or you know, an expert in this, an expert in that. I think it's almost an expectation, and because everyone else is doing it, then you think you've got to do it as well. So I think, you know, it's a fad. Hopefully, it will pass. But you know, it just. I think you know, social media sometimes has a lot to answer for.
In the next breath.
Yep.
These experts, or so-called experts, or wherever, and social media, I think actually are pushing personal development to people who may not have heard of it before or understood it, and pushing people to start doing it for themselves as opposed to waiting for the company to pay for it.
Undoubtedly. I mean, you start looking these days, you go online, there is so much free development you can get. You could, yeah, there's stuff. It doesn't, not even having to be free. It could be, you know, very small expense. I came across something, and I can't for the life of me remember what site it was on, but they were actually offering a Prince 2 project management qualification, which if you go to a sort of training course on that, you're talking thousands of pounds. And I think it was something like £25 for all the coursework, but you do it online, and then you paid about 150 quid on top of that for the exam. And you think companies are paying vast amounts. So in many ways, the advent of social media, the advent of the World Wide Web, whatever, it gives us access to far greater potential for development. I mean, one of my personal favourites is Audible. I absolutely love the Audible app. And on Tuesday, I was up in London, so I jumped on the train and had an hour and a half with my headphones put in, quite happily, just listening to books. And I don't listen to novels. I listen to, you know, books on management and leadership and stuff. I actually happen to find them very interesting. But again, it's the potential for us to invest in our own development because of everything that technology has made available. There's masses out there, so the potential is far greater.
Well, Matt, believe it or not, we're getting towards the end of our time together. So my last question really would be, what do you think, based on what we've just said, and how available personal development or training is, what do you think is the future of it going forward?
I can only see it growing far more. And the crucial thing is people need to, or some people need to change their mindsets and realize that actually I own my development, you own your development, and so on and so on. And yes, if you're in the corporate world, your boss has a role to play in providing you with development opportunities, but only you can decide whether or not you're going to invest in them. And don't wait for other people. If you think it's going to benefit you to learn how to do X, it's quite remarkable how easy it is to source it these days. So like I say, I just think it particularly as a sort of a provider of development opportunities, I hope that the future is very rosy.
Well, Matt, thank you so much for your time. It's been
my pleasure.
And for everybody else, if you enjoyed the show, then please subscribe, leave us a review, and more importantly, come back for the next episode. Thank you.